It's time to break up with your inner critic and find your caregiver. I'm partnering with Green Mountain at Fox Run to host the first ever Be Her Now Body Kindness Weekend, just for women. Join me Thursday, June 1st through Sunday, June 4th for a weekend of love, fun, and self-care. You'll experience Green Mountain's world-renowned program and brand new body kindness spiral up activities, all in the natural beauty of Vermont. Let's take the time to work on ourselves, heal with others, and get inspired to create a better life. Learn more at fitwoman.com/bodykindness. Because real health is about being good to yourself, it's time for Body Kindness, the place where all bodies fit and weight is just a number. Hi, I'm Rebecca Scritchfield, author of the book Body Kindness, registered dietitian, nutritionist, and host of this podcast. My topic today is intuitive eating as an act of body kindness, and my special guest to discuss this is Evelyn Tribole. She is an award-winning registered dietitian with a nutrition counseling practice in Newport Beach, California. Hello, sunshine. And she specializes in eating disorders. She also trains health professionals on how to help their clients cultivate a healthy relationship with food, mind, and body through the process of intuitive eating, a concept she co-pioneered. She is the author of 9 books, including co-author of Intuitive Eating. Her newest book is the Intuitive Eating Workbook, 10 Principles for Nourishing a Healthy Relationship with Food. She was the nutrition expert for Good Morning America and was a national spokesperson for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics for 6 years. Tribole is often sought after by the media for her nutritional expertise and has appeared in hundreds of interviews, including CNN, NBC's Today Show, MSNBC, Fox News, USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, and People magazine. She also gives presentations around the world on intuitive eating. Evelyn qualified for the Olympic trials in the first ever women's marathon in 1984. Although she no longer competes, Evelyn runs for fun and is an avid skier and hiker. She also enjoys surfing, kayaking, and whitewater rafting. Evelyn's favorite food is chocolate when it can be savored slowly. Oh, I love that. Welcome to the show, Evelyn.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I can't stop grinning. My face hurts because I'm I'm like overjoyed in so many ways. I mean, you were so transformational in my personal journey to health and well-being. And so it's like, in a hopefully not weird way, I really do idolize you and
Wow.
all your work. And just, I'm excited to let all the listeners of Body Kindness really get to know you and understand what valuable gifts you bring to the world. So to get us started there, I would just love for you to fill everyone in on your work and what you're most interested in currently.
Oh my goodness, what a big question. It's so gratifying to know I had such an impact on you. And I think that's the bottom line with intuitive eating. I mean, lives really change when you're able to stop and listen to the direct experience of your body. And so to answer your big question, let me just start with first what intuitive eating is. You know, there's a lot of misunderstandings because it's become so popularized, which actually I'm very excited about. But sometimes people get a misunderstanding as to what it is. It's like, yeah, I eat donuts every day, hoo-hoo, you know. But it's actually a little more complicated, but it's not that complex. There's 10 principles, and it's actually an evidence-based model. And there's been 70 studies to date showing benefits. But I'd say ultimately what it really means is that you and only you can be the expert of your body. Only you know your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, and no one can tell you what to do. Or as my daughter used to say when she was 2, you can't be the boss of me. So it's taking back your power, you know?
Yeah. And it's so important. And I think no matter when intuitive eating comes to you, that there is going to be fear. You know, see, even this idea of like, what do you mean take back my power? You know, maybe you felt powerless for a really long time. And I know with me, it was like, oh my gosh, on the one hand, what I'm learning about intuitive eating sounds amazing. On the other hand, ain't no way I could do it. So, to have this conflict, I just want to let listeners know that was my exact thoughts and feelings. Of course, I didn't have confidence in my abilities because I wasn't yet an intuitive eater, but I could just stay attached to the idea that no amount of calorie counting or dieting or planning or whatever it was I thought was going to save me ever worked. It actually made my life worse, not better. And, even if I was at this kind of crossroads of like, well, okay, it wasn't like, oh, I'm finally ready to let go of all dieting before I practice intuitive eating. It was much more about, I know I can't be where I'm at, so let me try a different approach and see what happens. And I just find that a lot of people, it's like, am I doing intuitive eating correctly? What are the new rules? If I'm not dieting, what are the new rules of intuitive eating? And I don't think that is, yes, as you mentioned, there are the guidelines, but and to learn them and learn what they mean, but even how you intentionally put nutrition at the end. Would you like to share kind of why that was decided?
It's so ironic. Lisa and I are both registered dietitian nutritionists, master of science degrees in nutrition. So we love nutrition. And yet here it's the last principle. And the reason we did that, it's not because it's not important. But what happens is if you take the most well-meaning guidelines and you embrace it with the mind of a dieter, you're going to turn it into a diet. And I will tell you, that's even more true today than it was in 1995 when we first came up with this premise and published the book. There's so much rigidity. And in fact, what we've seen people unintentionally turn intuitive eating into a diet. And because we've seen that happen so much in our new workbook, we even have this little warning box. Warning. Don't turn this into a diet. And here's the question is, how do you know if you're doing that or not? So the classic mind of the diet, there's rules, there's rigidity, there's all or none, there's pass or fail. Intuitive eating is a process of self-discovery. It's a curious, open journey. So even if you have an eating experience that you don't like, there's always something to be learned from that, And if you can take it in that perspective, it changes everything. So for example, I've had patients say, oh my God, I blew it. I ate when I wasn't hungry. Well, that's not blowing it. What did you discover? You ate when you weren't hungry. So what happened then, let's say at the next meal? Maybe you were less hungry. But people panic and they make up these little rules about, okay, I ate right now, so now I'm not going to eat my lunch or I'm going to have a light lunch. And as a result, they miss out on the opportunity to see, oh, their body might have naturally wanted less to eat, but because they micromanaged it, they think they have to get into all these rules and rigidity. And I'll tell you, it's a miserable way to live.
Yeah. No, and it can get very confusing. And the last thing I would want a person to feel is that there's not structure in intuitive eating. I actually see a lot of structure in intuitive eating, but it's just a better type of a structure. And what I mean by that is that I feel like when they're trying to practice principles, really it's their mind rebelling because they're like free from the diet, but they get scared almost like if this behavior is what intuitive eating is, then maybe it's not for me. And it's like, no. That is part of like your diet detox, for lack of a better word.
It is a good word, actually. Yeah. Or you know what, to be honest, if someone's been living with a lot of rules and structure and rigidity, to suddenly go into intuitive eating feels like a free fall. It's like, oh my God. It's like putting Scotch tape on the paws of your kitty cat. They don't know how to walk anymore because they don't have their senses. But instead, what we really do is we go, wait a minute, let's see what the direct experience is of your body. What is your body feeling right now? Are you hungry? Are you full? Are you indifferent? Or how do you just feel overall globally? Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? Let's start figuring out what's going on. But what ends up happening, I find, is that anytime somebody is really confused about what to eat, it's because they're stuck in their mind with the rules. Confusion comes from rules and beliefs around eating. But if we instead dial into, well, what is my body saying right now? What does my body need? It becomes a very powerful tool from which to work. It's empowering and it's life-changing.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I find that clients, they handle certain phases a little bit differently. So somebody I'm calling to mind right now, she just kind of needed to be that no structured rebellion, knew there was a nutrition principle, but it was like, for now, I need to decrease my thoughts about food to the point of I am just going to, okay, breakfast, what sounds good, and just that's it as far as the thinking. And while she's doing this, she's building up this fear of, oh my gosh, is this going to last forever? So, we need to work on kind of tolerating that fear. And now she's coming back around. I think I've had enough of a break where I think that if I could try to apply nutrition, because she's like, I know rationally, like, veggies are good for me. And I do like vegetables, even though they've been labeled as a diet food, and so it's like, now she's coming around to, okay, I think I can work with this idea of gentle nutrition. And so, I think that is a very typical path. I also think that I've had clients who are like, that sort of lack of any amount of planning is what feels scary. So how do I not diet and follow rules, but where can I find some guides where I still have freedom with my food, but I just feel like it's not like I'm being thrown into this abyss where it's going to be too overwhelming for me.
Right. So there's a couple ways to work with this. And we have to start where someone is at. We don't want to scare the bejeebers out of them. And so we might start with a little bit of structure, not because that's where we're going to stay, but it's just a place to begin. So for example, we know, and I know you already know this stuff, that, biologically we need to eat every 2 to 6 hours to keep our energy levels up, our blood sugar up. And so based on that, a general rule of thumb I'll give to somebody who wants a little more structure is, well, let's make sure you check in at least every 5 hours in terms of what's going on with your body. Am I biologically hungry? Could you commit to doing something like that? And that is a way to begin. And I've had some patients say, yeah, I can start with that, but I still need some more help on there. And so it depends on where they're at and what they need. And like you were saying, what fear is driving the behavior. And, it's funny, when Elise and I were writing the intuitive eating workbook, we really had some great discussions around self-care and kind of decided that, if we were rewriting intuitive eating from scratch today, we probably would have had 11 principles. And the 11th principle, not in that order, would have been self-care. Because if self-care is lacking, if you're running around in a stress mess and so chaotic, and I don't mean that in a negative way, I just mean that life gets crazy sometimes. How in the world are you going to hear hunger, let alone respond in a timely manner? How are you going to figure out what your needs are and so on? So sometimes we have to begin at that level. And sometimes we begin with nourishment as self-care, that, hey, you know what? I am not feeling, you would still have to put gas in the tank. So there's all different kinds of ways to work with this. So it's, and that's one of the things I love about the title of your book and your whole premise of this kindness. We need to be kind to our body. What is the kind thing for me to do right now? Would the kind thing be to nourish my body, or would it be to skip another meal, And sometimes answers in the question. So, yeah.
Right. Well, and I think part of where I see a lot of struggle that I've really been working with people on is this idea that it's okay to hold two goals that seem at odds with each other at the same time. So like, for example, on the one hand, I really get the idea of intuitive eating and I really want to practice it and learn it. But on the other hand, gosh, I still really want to lose weight. And it sounds like this intuitive eating is not about weight loss. So I better not try any of it. And I will talk to them about, well, this idea of where the desire for weight loss comes from, right? So diet culture and all these other pressures or past experiences or things you told yourself that life was better in this way and that way. And as we unpack that, to say, well, what if we sit with this desire, just accept it and make room for it? Yep, I still want to lose weight. I still think life would be better, blah, blah, blah. But I know what I cannot do is another diet. And there's something about intuitive eating that interests me. So even though it's not presented as a weight loss diet, and I know that I can't do it and expect, that there's a promise of weight loss or anything like that, but I don't need to wait until I'm suddenly able to say, I'm 100% body positive, forget diet culture, in order to start the process. Like sometimes you're just a little bit conflicted, and that shouldn't necessarily get in your way of starting the process, because you never know what you're going to learn, and that future healthier self just may be able to make better choices. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. It's a huge dilemma. In fact, I just had a session with a patient right before our particular talk right now. She was afraid to bring something up. And I said, part of intuitive eating is about being authentic. And I can't help you get to your real self unless I know your real thoughts. And that's when she confessed that she had thoughts of still wanting to lose weight and felt it was wrong to talk about. I said, no, everything is on the table. It's your reality. Let's talk about this. And it was a very powerful session. And what she came to realize that if she was to start pursuing weight loss, that all of the gains she has made with intuitive eating, she would rob herself of the experience of the freedom that she has been having as far as having peace with food and so on and so on. And so it was basically the same thing of acknowledging that the desire is there, but not making it the primary process. Because what ends up happening is if you make weight loss your goal, your priority, then you start evaluating and judging intuitive eating based on, well, did I lose weight? Well, how many calories is in this? Or how much do I weigh? So it really hijacks the process. And so it can be a little tricky, which is why we like to say, put weight loss on the back burner. But I got to tell you, this is where I kind of get on my little soapbox.
Let's do it.
I got it. I just got it. When you start looking at the research on how dieting in of itself is associated with more weight gain, and this has been shown in just about every population they've studied, down from little kids, little tiny kids, ages I think 7 to 12. They did like a 6-year study and found that, oh my God, there's been so many studies, I'm getting mixed up. They found kids, because the kids that dieted ended up having more weight gain independent of their baseline diet. They've shown this with teenagers in a 10-year follow-up study. They've shown this in twins. Some researchers said, well, maybe people gain more weight from dieting because they're genetically predisposed. Therefore, they're the ones who are dieting. So let's look at twins. And they followed the twins for 5 years and found that dieting independent of genetics predicted weight gain. Then there's been more research coming out showing that dieting creates a phenomenon called fat overshooting. So one of the things is one thing to be in conflict, and I totally get that, the pull in our culture and so on. But as a practitioner, it's like ethically, I would not want to help someone down that path because it creates even more problems and more dissonance and more disconnect. And I get patients who after a while get really angry. It's like, oh my God, why didn't anybody tell me this ahead of time? I would have never started a diet if I would have known it would have increased my odds for binge eating. I would have never started a diet knowing it would actually increase my risk of gaining more weight. I weigh more now than I would die right now to weigh what I weighed when I started my first diet. And I tell you, it's heartbreaking. And the amount of distraction and unnecessary suffering that happens in the pursuit of dieting is just, well, I already got started.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's like we need to do more to call it out for what it is. And I pulled out and circled it on my little notepad. Dieting is unethical.
Yeah, it really is. And so I think what it is between, by the way, I'm kind of a research geek. I'm very in touch with my inner nerd. And so it's one thing when you know the research and you see it, but then when you see it in the lives of people, of your patients day after day, it kills me. And so that's what I often try to do is have them connect with their own history of dieting and look at what has it really gotten you. And what kills me is when someone says, oh yeah, that diet really worked. It's like, really? Are you here right now? Why are all these problems and issues? It's true that you might have temporarily had some weight loss, but it wasn't sustainable. Not sustainable.
Well, and something else I've helped pull into clients' awareness too, especially when they say, "Oh, but that thing did work." Back them up a little bit more. Tell me what your life was like before you tried that diet. What were your typical choices? And it is pretty consistent that life was chaotic, for lack of a better term, lack of structure. And then they chose this certain diet, which put them on a structure, and they felt better. And I'm seeing this a lot with today's diets in disguise, Whole30, paleo, and those types of diets. And so that's where I point out, this was actually a client who saw me, left for a while, did the other diety stuff. It made it worse. She acknowledged that, came back. And that's what I helped her to see, was that you picked up these diets after a moment in your life where you didn't have a path. And so anything would have quote unquote worked in the short term to make you feel good about the path. But in the big picture, this is too restrictive, and any amount of what you're saying is positives for weight loss or whatnot, you can't really give credit to something that you can't do forever. And who knows, maybe intuitive eating would have given you some structure and improve your nutrition to increase your energy, and I think that people need to realize that when you give credit to the diet, biologically, we do see in the research, right, a short-term temporary benefit. But what were you doing before that probably where you want your long-term habits to be, or you would have never reached for the diet? But if that lacks structure, then of course, anything you would have seen is better. You see what I mean?
Yeah. And what's interesting too, I've had patients now coming in and saying, I'm a compulsive dieter. And so you're raising a really good point. And I actually like that terminology, because for some people, dieting has become their way of coping. Life seems unmanageable and really, really stressful. You follow a diet with specific rules, you know exactly what to do. It gives you a focus temporarily. And so that's why sometimes that when people are resolved to not diet and they find themselves wanting it, it's not just about the unattainable, sustainable weight loss. They actually liked the fact that their mind was just so focused, you know?
Yep. And I remember, speaking of research, reading some interesting evidence about the reward system, and that even that idea of that, visualizing yourself, shopping for smaller clothes or being more confident or whatever the promises of the diet are, that creates that dopamine reward that you're looking for. And so it's just the idea that I might reach this future goal is then rewarding. And it is what makes, sort of the idea of dieting addictive, because you keep telling yourself that life is going to be so much better. And just the thought of it gives you a reward.
Well, yeah, I often will call that the fantasy, and we have discussions around that. What has that fantasy have done for you? It gives them a timeout. It gives them escape. It gives them a dopamine hit, as you were describing. And so I think it's important to really look at that sometimes. How has dieting actually served you in other ways? Do you know what I mean? And which can help explain why it's so hard to let go of, besides the desire for a certain, body. But when I look at how, I read Viktor Frankl's book, God, only 10 years ago. It's such a classic, Man's Search for Meaning. Yeah. And I'm reading it through the eyes of the work that I do. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, people who are involved in dieting and in search of the so-called perfect body, they are distracted from finding their purpose in life. How sad is that? And there's so much more to living.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at least it's a distraction. And that's often what I think about too, is like, what isn't being accomplished? And, I started my body hatred like young, like puberty. And I really try not to lament over the past because I can't change it. I really try to make peace and just think about the present and going forward and everything. But when I do think about it, I can't help but feel like I missed out on just more joy in general, because of how much space the thinking about food and exercise and then telling myself, this is good, this is good, this is health, and health is good because you want to live a long time. It was like this crazy lie, and it didn't come from nowhere. It was what I would read in the magazines that said, this is what you need to be healthy. And so, yeah, I have done what I can do to make peace with the past. But that is part of what drives me, I would say, in a typical day, and not in in a way to clients where I'll try to kind of gently point that out. Like what would you do if you had more open space in your mind? But that is, to me, one of the biggest failures of this whole thing, is that the waste of energy. We're so lucky to be alive and to have this beating heart and to have this body. Whether or not you want to label flaws or whatever, we're still here. And so how can we just rise the conversation outside of this shell is the most important thing that I can do on this planet? Well, I do want to bring up research again. I'm a science nerd myself, and there is so much evidence for intuitive eating, but I bet you people don't really know that much about what's out there. So I would love for you to fill everyone in on the evidence that is out there. And I love that you called it a model, because that's very different. I love mindfulness. I know you do too. I know you do meditation and retreats and things. But it is important for people to understand that intuitive eating is a model. That means that the evidence that it has behind it, it is a structure that people can learn and follow. And there are elements of mindfulness that are part of intuitive eating. So I'd love for you to talk about the research and then explain that intersection of mindfulness and intuitive eating.
Okay. Well, gosh, to date, there have been over 70 studies on intuitive eating showing benefit. And I find that just incredibly exciting. Intuitive eaters have a higher sense of well being, better self esteem, lower rates of eating disorders when they've looked at their blood levels, better cholesterol profiles, and so on. And they actually eat pretty healthy. Now, something I find really interesting, it's intriguing, and yet it could be problematic. Every study that's looked at intuitive eating and body mass index, and you know the body mass index is fraught with problems, they have found that intuitive eaters have a lower body mass index. And the reason part of that is promising is for the naysayers that say, well, oh my gosh, if you let people eat whatever they want to, they're going to become overweight. They're going to be not fit. They're not going to be healthy. And actually, the research is showing that's actually not the case at all. But one of the concerns we have is that people and or organizations or public policy will take intuitive eating as a way to approach weight loss. And that's what this is not about. I want to be really clear about that, loud and clear, that this is healthy on its own. There was a really interesting study just published last year where they did an intervention study on cancer patients using a combination of basically a cooking class and intuitive eating, and found better quality of life because it was more empowering. It's like, oh my gosh, what a way to go with this. A new study was just published this year looking at intuitive eating and the treatment of eating disorders and finding it pretty effective. It was a pilot study. So it's just really exciting to see all of this coming out. But what's really needed right now is we need intervention studies. In other words, a standardized way of looking at intuitive eating compared to another kind of treatment approach. And it's one of the reasons why we came up with this workbook, is to give a standardized way to implement intuitive eating. Because when some studies have done this, they haven't used all the principles. They haven't used the move your body so it feels good kind of principle or gentle nutrition. So that part's important as well. There's also been fascinating research coming out showing, which is not surprising, that intuitive eaters have a higher body awareness. And scientifically, this is called interoceptive awareness. And interoceptive awareness is our ability to perceive physical sensations that arise from within the body. So, for example, feeling hungry, feeling full, that's interoception. Mm-hmm. Feeling a rapid heart rate or a full bladder, that's interoceptive awareness. But the part I'm really fascinated about is that every emotional feeling has a physical signature as well. And I think it's one of the reasons why that as people become more in touch with what's going on with their body, it tends to be life-changing in other aspects of, there's just more awareness that's cultivated. So I just find this so exciting. And there's been a lot of big studies. There was a study published out of France last year on 50,000 people. There was a study, the United States, I think, on 3,000 young adults. So the research is looking really promising. And more importantly, it's not doing any harm. It's helping people and it's empowering them. So this is a way to go. So the part two of the question you asked me is the intersectionality with mindfulness. And, it's funny, last year I was on a panel speaking on this very issue. There were mindfulness experts and I was there talking about intuitive eating, and we all agree they're very, very compatible methods and models. They really, really are, but they're different. And the thing that makes intuitive eating, I guess, different, there's actually 10 specific principles. There's actually a standardized assessment scale that it can actually measure it. So, and it's very, very comprehensive. There's an outright principle that says reject dieting. And someone who's really into, very, strict mindfulness would be, we don't start with any judgments. And my philosophy on this is that if we have to wait for people to come to the understanding that dieting is harming yourself in this culture, it would create unnecessary suffering. And yet we have to have awareness to know if we're hungry, to know what foods will satisfy. And back when we first wrote Intuitive Eating in 95, the term mindful eating was not in the public vernacular. In fact, it wasn't until, Jon Kabat-Zinn wrote his amazing book, Full Catastrophe Living, I believe it was, talked about mindfulness eating. And so we use the term conscious eating to talk about awareness. And I think mindfulness is actually a better term than consciousness. So the more mindfulness you have, of course, the better only through awareness can meaningful change take place. And it's important to cultivate this sense of open curiosity and no judgment. And as I tell my patients, if your inner critic is this horrible loudmouth that's crude and nasty. I've been so surprised with some of my patients when I ask for an example of some self-talk and the nastiness that comes out. It's like, wow, if I knew that's what I was going to hear, if I checked into the awareness of my mind and thoughts, I would never want to be aware. So that's part of the reason why it's important that we cultivate this gentle awareness. And actually, compassion is so important. In fact, so important we included it in our workbook. And that's the work out of Kristen Neff, who's like the expert on self-compassion. And there's been a lot of interesting research showing that self-compassion really is something that can significantly help a person let go of the guilt associated with eating. And that's a phenomenon I've seen a lot with patients where, because they can't let go of the guilt and shame, that ends up snowballing into another eating event that they don't feel good about either, as opposed to being able to learn from it, you know? Most of my patients, and I'm sure yours too, Rebecca, are just so hard on themselves. And they have this misleading idea that if you're compassionate, you're just like saying, it's okay, it's a free pass. It's like, no, it's a kind way to look at this perspective, a gentle way of working with yourself. And so I have great hope about that aspect of our work.
Oh, that just all sounds so amazing. And thank you for sharing all those insights. I remember seeing, by now it was probably several years ago, but it was in the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics about intuitive eating, and basically even in the absence of weight loss, that lab values improved. And I think that is also a really important thing to bring about, because so often we say, but I need to lose weight for health, or this is for health.
Yeah.
And we have to understand that is just diet culture. And, I think in this day and age, I mean, like before, but it sucks basically to be in a larger body, because even as you work on yourself, and I think you should work on yourself, but everyone else in society is pointing the finger like, but you need to do this diet thing first and then whatever. And, so I do think we have an obligation to help people separate out true health and mind and body health, that it's not appearance and thinness, that it is that yes, we need to know our lab values, but that is mostly genetic predisposition. And there's, behaviors can help, influence gene expression and all that. I'm not trying to take credit away from habits, but surprisingly, I mean, habits have an impact, right? But dieting isn't what's going to make a difference. It's being active, and any size body can be active,
Well, you raise a really good point, because I tell you what, I get this question a lot, and that is, well, if you have diabetes, you need to. And there are actually two big studies that just blew researchers out of the way. In fact, I love reading their conclusions because it shows their own bias and weight stigma. But I'm not kidding, there was a study on these diabetic patients. It was a 6-year-long study. Both groups were overweight. Both groups had type 2 diabetes. One group had the intervention of weight loss for a 6-year period. And so they predicted that this would be the healthiest group. And it's like, the group that stayed overweight and stable actually had better outcomes, and they were blown away. And then there was recently a 9-year diabetic study that got stopped prematurely because the weight loss intervention was not having an impact that they thought. So there's all this misbelief in our also by our healthcare professionals. And the term obesity paradox is a great book called The Obesity Paradox by Carl Levy that has blown the lid off the water on this idea that you have to be a certain size or a certain weight to be healthy. And that's why this whole idea of health at any size is so important, not just from a biological health standpoint, but when you start looking at issues of weight stigma and how that in of itself can cause its own issues, it's really, really problematic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I actually haven't read The Obesity Paradox yet, so I wrote that down really fast. It's going to be my next read. I did love What's Wrong with Fat, and of course, Health at Every Size. But yeah, was the second study you mentioned, was that Look Ahead study by chance? Oh my gosh. I remember seeing a graph of what that looked like. And it's like the first 2 years, you see this dramatic, sharp, like line down for weight loss. And then you see this slow and steady climb as the time went on. And yeah, they literally ended it for futility, saying, no matter what, we're never going to get the outcomes that we thought we would get. And interestingly, I think a lot of people look at that, oh, well, they just gave up. Oh, well, they didn't make it a habit, blah, blah, blah. And I'm really watching Kevin Hall's research come out. And the one most, of course, the Biggest Loser study, that was like crazy, revelations. But the most recent one showing basically what I read into it is that there is a negative feedback loop post-dieting that is completely out of human control. We can't think about it. We can't turn this on. It is all biology, and it's through the brain, and it basically sends urges to eat, appetite, and cravings at 3 times the strength. So it basically is, he's identifying this is the area, this is what's going on in the brain that is causing, the person to weight cycle back up. And Kevin Hall, I would not say he's health at every size, but he at least, he's a researcher with NIH funding at the NIH, but he is at least, I think, taking away this idea of that it's all human responsibility, it's all that lazy person, and more of really trying to understand the brain and what is happening here. So I think that we need to keep, looking at this kind of stuff. And in the meantime, just keep piling on this information, because at some point people aren't going to be able to argue that it is futile, and it is a tough pill for somebody to swallow, as long as our culture says that there's a problem with fat bodies. And I just think that's the honest truth.
Yeah. I think when we start looking at this process of intuitive eating, ultimately what's so wonderful, first of all, that health includes more than just size. It includes mental health, emotional health, psychosocial health, that people actually feel better. When you remove the guilt from eating is more enjoyable. It's more satisfying. It doesn't take as much to satisfy. And so ultimately, you have more space to do what it is that you want in your life, as opposed to be counting calories and having anxiety about should you eat this or not that, and what should you wear to make your body look the best, and so on and so on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the first season of the Body Kindness podcast I did with my friend Bernie Salazar, he was actually a contestant on The Biggest Loser. He was season 5. He actually was, and I'm doing my air quotes here, but he was the at-home winner of season 5. So he got confetti, a giant check, the whole thing, like, oh, my life would be amazing. And it wasn't after he went home and he experienced what season 6 did, which was weight regain. And when that study came out, I helped him understand what they were finding with that study. And it was hard for him to process it. He's like, basically, you're telling me that I'd be better off having never gone on the show at all. I was like, yep, that's basically it. But I did intuitive eating with him. And when we kind of ended that first season and kicked off the new one, so we still check in once a month with each other, kind of like as kind of partners, he said something interesting that it plays off what you just said. He said, I just like myself more.
Oh, wonderful.
Isn't that wonderful? And it's like, that's how he felt as a result of intuitive eating. Like, just like, I just like myself more. So there's this different motivation for how I make my choices, and I'm not fighting food anymore. So I thought you'd appreciate hearing that.
I do.
Okay, so I do want to get a couple more. So I did the level 1 and 2 supervision with you as a dietitian. It was amazing. Now I understand now that you don't have to be a dietitian to do it, that you could be any health professional. So I really would like to know more about who you're certifying, why it's so important to certify other professionals.
Yeah, basically, we were originally going to certify just dietitians. And Elise said, wouldn't it be a better place if all allied health professionals, that if you refer to a therapist or an exercise physiologist, that they're getting the same message. And so that's why we decided to open it up to basically any allied health professional in this process, so that you would work in the intuitive eating process with your clients or patients, but within your scope of practice. And right now we are in 17 countries, and I think we have over 600 health professionals that have been certified. And there's a center that's just opening up in Moscow, in Russia. So it's really, really exciting. And part of the reason we decided decided to do this is to keep the integrity of the process, because we saw some well-meaning health practitioners doing things that are not congruent with intuitive eating. So we thought we need to kind of standardize this in a way and help the consumer be able to identify somebody who's been trained in our method.
Well, before we get off the phone, can you just share where people can go to get some more information?
Sure, they can go to our website, intuitiveeating.org. They can go to my website, evelyntribole.com. And of course, we have our new Intuitive Eating Workbook and our classic Intuitive Eating if people would like to get more information. So thank you so much for having me on your show.
Oh, thank you for chatting. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
The Body Kindness Classroom is coming. If you're ready for some radical collaboration, check out bodykindnessbook.com and check out Shop for more information. We're going to be having classes on body kindness calm and body kindness food. I'll see you in school.